Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. I'm so pleased today to be joined by Dave Koehn. He's the voice of the Virginia Cavaliers. He's been in Charlottesville since 2008. It's a real pleasure to talk to him today. Dave, thank you so much for joining us.
Billy, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
For sure, and I told Dave when we initially corresponded that despite our collegiate differences, I'm a big fan of his work, a great professional. He does a great job with UVA, so really excited to talk to him today. So Dave, I wanted to go back to the early days. When did you know you wanted to become a sports broadcaster?
Yeah. Who's and Hokies living together. We can all make peace, right? There is such a thing as peace on earth. To answer your question in terms of when I first knew I wanted to be a broadcaster, I think that's I'm gonna answer it because I know you asked when I first knew. I would say I probably didn't know I wanted to be a sportscaster until I was really honestly in college. I think I had suspicions that I might. In fact, going all the way back to it was funny, about 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe even last year at Christmas, my mom had something framed up for me. She had found in our basement. It was like from when I was 8 years old. And it was something where we'd done these illustrations in a class I must have been in. And it said, what you want to be when you grow up? And I had said sportscaster on this thing when I was 8 years old. So that was kind of cool. It was early documentation of when it had at least been started bouncing around in my head. But like I say, I don't think I really knew until I had really tried it and called games. And I started calling games at the University of Kansas and felt like I had a penchant for it right out of the gates. Felt like it was something that maybe I could be good at. And then also knew it was something I was really going to enjoy. I just, certain things in life you do, you feel like I was meant to do this. And I feel really, really fortunate throughout my life to have discovered something that I feel like I was meant to do. And it not only aligns with my skill set, but it aligns with what I really enjoy doing. And to me, that's like the greatest gift of all, when you can find a career path that not only you feel like you're good at, but you really, really enjoy doing, whether people are paying you or not.
And I'm sure you've heard this before, but I feel like you have one of the great radio voices out there. It seems like you got the perfect voice for radio. And you mentioned you got your start at Kansas in college. What are some of your favorite memories covering Jayhawks?
Oh yeah, wow. Well, I do remember. I think the last game I did there was my senior year, and it was a top 10 showdown at Allen Fieldhouse when Virginia was playing Ohio State. And we were sitting courtside as a student radio station. And I looked down the court, press row there, or whatever we want to call it. And I look at, and this is when Vitale was at his prime, Dick Vitale, like he had bobbleheads about him, everything, here's this icon. And I'm just this college student at the time. And I'm looking down, I'm like, am I really sharing space with this guy right now in this setting at this like most hallowed of college basketball and sports venues? That really stood out to me. That's one of my favorite memories. But really just having a chance to cut my teeth and do big time sports was what I really enjoyed about that whole process. Is a college kid, if I heard some of that tape now, I'd probably run and hide. It was raw, but that's the name of the game in this business, is getting a chance to do those games, cut your teeth, get the repetitions. And what they say, 10,000 reps makes a master. And I really believe that. And some guys come out a little more ready-made than others. I don't think that I necessarily was. I think, in some ways, you mentioned the fact that I am fortunate to have a pretty good broadcaster's voice, but and that's just dumb luck. I did not do anything to develop my voice. I just got lucky in that sense. But I also feel like I've always had a little bit of an ear for things, whether it's music, whatever. I have had an ability to replicate things in terms of sound, and I think that even goes into my cadence in terms of how my delivery is as a broadcaster. But I do think that is more than anything dumb luck there. But the thing that is not dumb luck is learning and honing your skills as you go. And I remember in some ways where I was going as I'm rambling here a little bit, but in terms of one of my early mentors and professors was a guy by the name of Tom Hedrick, who put out a book as well. And he was actually writing that book while I was in college. But he would, we would do these broadcasts not broadcasts, we'd do these play-by-play segments into our tape recorder a lot of the time when you were starting out. We'd bring him into the class and we'd listen to him and he'd review him and he'd grill you. He was unmerciful at times, but I remember him saying to me, you may be able to fool some people with that voice of yours, but you won't fool me. And And, I probably did early in my career fool some people just because I did have a pretty good set of pipes that I was working with, even though what I was saying probably didn't match it much. And someone probably argued it still doesn't, but it's but you do need to know your stuff, and you need to do your preparation and your homework and all of these things that go with it. And I feel like I learned that in spades while I was in college, and really kind of took those habits with me throughout the rest of my career.
And between your time in Kansas and Virginia, you went to Texas. You called games at Sam Houston State, Texas Lutheran. Then you go to the University of Vermont. Obviously, two very different areas of the country, geographically and culturally, I'm sure. What are some of your favorite memories in Texas as well as Vermont?
Well, and there was one that you also didn't mention in there, was my first stop in Texas was Sam Houston State, which is another geographic locality that is even more, I guess, culturally different from anything I'd experienced, which is East Texas. And there's a major, for anyone who doesn't know Texas, it is a huge state, and it is drastically different culturally from one end of the state to the other end of the state. So East Texas at Sam Houston State was, look, I studied overseas in college, and I've always traveled a lot. I said it before, I didn't feel more culture shock overseas than I did when I got to Texas, East Texas, and doing Sam Houston States. I mean, it was a different experience for a Colorado kid like myself. And so, yeah, that was something. But I'll tell you, in that job more than any other, that was my first college job, because I'd taken a job doing high school sports and some sales and some, morning show stuff, DJing, that kind of deal in Colorado for my first year out of college in Estes Park and in Loveland, Colorado, between those two. And then I got my first college job at Sam Houston State in Huntsville, Texas. And I never called more games than I did during that stretch. And I think it was one of the most invaluable times for me as a play-by-play guy, because I was not only doing men's basketball for Sam Houston State, I was doing women's basketball, and oftentimes double headers in that league at the time. And then I was doing, obviously, Sam Houston State football at the time. And then I was also doing high school football, high school boys basketball, high school girls basketball. And then I was doing baseball in all sorts of stuff, in softball in the spring. I mean, it just was an unrelenting schedule. And at the time, it's not exactly conducive to a young 20-something social life, but I'll tell you, it was conducive to getting better at my craft. And that was what I was there for. I mean, that's the bottom line. I wasn't there to be social. I was there to get better at what I was doing. And I feel like I did. And I'm sure there were some really shaky broadcasts along the way, but we got there. And then that station actually lost the broadcast rights to Sam Houston State. So I'm sitting here saying, am I really going to live in East Texas just to do high school sports? And the answer was a quick no. And so then another Kansas friend of mine had been at Texas Lutheran in more of the central Texas area, along that corridor between San Antonio and Austin, and which is kind of a neat area. And so I took that job, and I got an opportunity to not only do Texas Lutheran sports, but cover the Spurs. And it was a full sports job there. So I was, it was actually a really good quality of life. That's where I met my wife. And then I got the job at Vermont. Yep, as you mentioned, and I was doing Vermont men's basketball along with Vermont Lake Monsters, minor league baseball, which is probably where I cultivated about 80% of my wild stories in my career in that little 2-year window doing minor league baseball. But you see the country, you see the world, you learn a lot about yourself in the process, and you get better at your craft. And I don't know, there's a lot of ways you can go about this business and getting in, a lot of different paths you can take. I wouldn't trade mine for anything. I feel like not only did I get a chance to do a lot of reps, but it also gave me a greater sense of appreciation for where I am now, based on what I went through to get here.
Can you give me a story from your time in minor league baseball? I mean, you mentioned you have a lot of incredible stories. I mean, anything, I don't know if it's G-rated or whatever, you can give me a good story from minor leagues?
Yeah. I mean, for sure. Some of them were G-rated, some of them were not. I mean, it was just crazy stuff you saw. I mean, I'll tell you, let's see. Yeah, I remember one time I was doing a game in Brooklyn. Yeah, it was in Brooklyn. We were playing in against the Cyclones there. Now, if you have any familiarity with that layout, it's right next to the theme park, where the famous Cyclone roller coaster is. So you can see that off out of the left field. I think it was outfield. You can see this old, it's like, I think it was the biggest wooden roller coaster in the country or something like that. The Brooklyn Cyclones. So obviously that's the name of the baseball team too. And so anyway, we're playing there. I'm doing the game by myself. And I remember they were shooting off fireworks at the theme park. And so they shot off so many, the smoke came in and you couldn't even see the field. And so that's the starting point. The backdrop, we've got smoke everywhere. Then one of our guys is at the plate, and there was a pitcher whose name was, I kid you not, Bino. His last name was Bino.
Wow.
And the guy had hit, I think, 4 straight batters or something like that. And I knew it going into it. So I'd said, Bino's here, and he's hit 4 straight batters. Well, sure enough, first pitch, he drills our guy on the inside. Second pitch, he hits him in the head. A straight shot to the head. Our guy goes down. He's almost like unconscious, sitting by home plate. Smoke is pouring in. They have to bring out like emergency personnel, and I'm by myself describing this scene. And I'm like, you cannot write this stuff. I mean, the guy's name is Bino, and on 2 straight pitches, he beans our guy after doing it 4 straight times previously. Once in the head, our guy's down. Oh, and by the way, it's the 9th inning, and there's a tying run at third base. I mean, it's just, you couldn't write it. And I mean, it was just like that kind of thing just seemed to happen. I mean, that's one that comes to mind. And I got plenty more, but that was pretty amazing. I need to write some of these down because I'm afraid I'm going to forget them at some point. But yeah, it was a wild experience. Minor league baseball has that tendency, though. You just, things happen there that don't happen other places.
For sure. It seems like made for a movie the way you were describing it. And obviously your allegiance now is to the UVA Cavaliers. You came to Charlottesville in 2008. How did this opportunity open up for you?
This was a job that when I initially heard about it, I had actually just gotten back from a vacation. And I remember thinking I was a little late in the process. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to have a shot at that job. Do I even bother applying? And I remember thinking that. And I can't remember who it was that I talked to. They said, oh, yeah, put your name in the hat. You might as well. And so thank God I did. And I didn't know anybody. I'm a little bit of an exception to the rule, I feel like, in my career, and that most of the jobs I've had have not really been through connections. But, I don't know. I've been very fortunate. I mean, and with this said, I mean, I think there were other jobs I was applying for that I did not hear back for that were actually lesser pedigree jobs than this. And this job actually presented itself at the same time Boise State had presented itself, which I applied for as well. And as a matter of fact, I went out and interviewed for both of them and was offered the Boise State job 24 hours before I was offered this job. And actually, I was on the air doing a minor league baseball team. I remember when I got the call from Virginia, because I had told Virginia, hey, look, you guys are kind of my 1A here on this, and I did get this offer, and I can't, walk away from it. I need to know what's going on with you guys. And so I remember getting the call while I was on the air, and I saw it go to voicemail. I'm like, oh God, I got to get to this ad break. So then I get to the ad break and I hear it, and he essentially infers that if I want it, it's mine. And that was an amazing night. I'll never forget that, finishing that game, because this was the chance when I feel like I got this job that you knew that you could do this for a living. And when I say that, I say it because, as you know, this industry is full of jobs that don't pay much. And at some point you can come to a crossroads where you say, how long am I in this for? I was married at that time. And, you think about how long will I continue to push at this? When I got that job, I'm trying to think, your original question was how that came to be. I guess it was, a very standard. I sent my stuff in, they liked what they heard. And then I went through a series of interviews and was able to separate myself from the pack through those interviews to fit what they wanted at that time. And I mean, so much of this is fit. You could be the best broadcaster in the world, but you may not be the right fit for a certain organization or entity. I happen to be the fit they were looking for at the University of Virginia. And fortunately, the sound, and they took a chance on me, because I was definitely a long shot, I'm sure, amongst the people that were interviewing for that job. And I got my break there. And, regardless of what happens in my career from here, I'm certainly in no hurry to leave the University of Virginia. I love it at UVA. It fits a lot of the things that I hold dear in my life in terms of how they approach things. I really like being the voice of a team. I like living in Charlottesville, and I like the institution, what it stands for. So, but that to say, let's say I got offered the Monday Night Football gig, whatever that was. I still don't think that moment would be as impactful as being offered this Virginia job, because I knew I could be a sports broadcaster for the rest of my life if I wanted to, and that was worth its weight in gold.
It's very interesting. You found out you got the job kind of through it while you were calling a minor league game. I think John Laser, the voice of the Hokies, has a similar story. So maybe you guys can connect about
Yeah,
that.
I've not heard
you
this.
guys
I'd be
called the game
interested to talk to him about it. Yeah, no, I have not heard that. I know John was obviously doing minor league baseball before he was in this job. So maybe I'll have to mention that to him tomorrow when I see him.
For sure. So you've had so many incredible memories calling games for the Who's. I have to go to three in particular, and I hate to ask you the first question, but I'm going to do it. What was it like, to call that game against UMBC in the first round in 2018? Number one seed, first time it happened. I really did, hopefully it doesn't come off. I really did feel bad for those guys because you just don't expect that. As a broadcaster, how do you process that moment?
Yeah, it tests you. It really, really does. One thing I say that I actually felt a little bit fortunate in is that we had been tested in a similar spot to that previously. So I think we were down by 7 at halftime, maybe 2 years before, to a low seed as a 1, or maybe we were a 2. I can't remember, but I remember going through that moment where I was like, wow, we might lose this. You almost feel sick to your stomach, because as I mentioned, is when you're the voice of a team, it's not like team A versus team B, two arbitrary teams. These are guys that, you have a vested interest in succeeding in terms of your operation. The more success they have, the more success you're going to have. And then B, you have these relationships with these people. These people as human beings, and particularly when you like them the way I have through the years working with a guy like Tony Bennett, man, you can't help but root for him, as he's just done it the right way his whole time. And you bleed for them when things aren't going well. And, on the air, you have to maintain that professionality through the whole process. And that is a challenge sometimes in those situations. And candidly, it's been a challenge in some of the games against Virginia Tech through the years, because look, I was here for 12 years before I finally called a win. 12 years, that wears on you as a broadcaster. It really, really does. And so the last couple of years, I would literally show up to the stadium with a knot in my stomach. I'm like, oh, I got to go through this again. It's almost like PTSD. But going back to your question as it relates to UMBC, I remember after the game was through, and I think this is worth noting for young broadcasters, is you are a conduit to that fan base. You're a mouthpiece. And honestly, we put on almost like our psychiatrist hat in that, and we put the listeners on the couch and we said, you know what, got very philosophical about it. And I remember that in that post game. It was unlike anything I've ever been a part of before, but that's kind of what it was like. And, and those are the times that test you, though, really, as a broadcaster, more than just about any. And I say that honestly, when things are going really well in that national championship situation, that tests you too, because there's a different kind of pressure that comes with that. But to experience the full gamut, though, all in 1 year, is something that no broadcaster has ever experienced but me. It's never happened. And so I'm grateful for it, because it's a hell of a story, and it's a story I'll be telling for the rest of my life.
And that's the thing. I should have mentioned you're an NCAA champion college sports broadcaster. And of course, you mentioned right after the UMBC loss, the UVA turns it around, goes back to the Final Four. Some people say a controversial win against Auburn, and then a big win in overtime to win the championship against Texas Tech. So after that UMBC loss, from the lowest to lows go to the highest to highs, winning that national championship. What was it like to be on the call for that moment?
Yeah, surreal. I think it was, I don't know, you never, the sweet's never as sweet unless you've tasted the bitter. I believe that. And I believe that in life, and not just in this context, but and it's one of the things I go back to as well when it relates to even having an appreciation for my job, being in some of these places where you were at a mom and pop shop and you were doing 18 different things and maybe not living in the best place. you really appreciate it when you do have it. And I think the same goes for some of these moments. But as I was alluding to, relating to that national championship game, I mean, there is this level of pressure when you go into a game like that as a broadcaster. I mean, we are the soundtrack for these games for all time. And you don't take that lightly in those moments when you know that this is something that is going to potentially be replayed forever. And you don't want to do it disservice by messing it up. And so, it's this idea of how much do I script, how much do I not, how much do I let be real, and it's a little bit tricky. But I won't lie to you. Going into that game that day, I was surprisingly more nervous than I thought I would be when I woke up that morning. I've done all these games, and I was a little nervous that day. And incidentally, it was kind of funny because of all the people that kind of got me feeling more comfortable. It was Tony Bennett. I'll never forget. I was talking to him, taping our pregame interview that day at the hotel. And I ended up getting a chance to just sort of visit with him for, I don't know, it was like 30 minutes to an hour, just he and I. And I don't know, he put a real sense of calm in me from that experience, just talking to him. And that's the kind of guy he is. I mean, it's just this incredible level of balance. And so, all these things that you experience in that one year, so grateful for. But yeah, it was an amazing ride and experience all the way through.
And the last moment, I hate to ask you this question, but I asked you the UMBC question, so I'll ask you this question. Obviously, last year, for the first time, as you mentioned, since you became the voice of the Hoos, UVA knocks off Virginia Tech. What was that moment like? And I guess a bigger part two to that question is, what does Tech and UVA have to do to become a big rivalry like some of these schools in the SEC? I mean, you really feel like it's not the same level as some of the other big-time rivalries in the country.
Well, I'll put it this way. Well, to answer the first part of your question, what was that like? That was not quite as good as winning a national championship, but it wasn't far because that one had been so long in coming. And the year before, for it to end the way it did was just a rip your heart out type of experience for Virginia. And I'd been through a ton of them. And it means so much to our fans. It is cruel and unusual to ask a group of fans to go to the water cooler every day and see their counterparts on the other side of things and have to go through that year in, year out for 15 years. I mean, you wish that on you wouldn't wish that on your worst enemy. And so that's what these people have been dealing with. And, and for them more than anybody, I was happy for that experience. And of course, for Bronco and for all the guys that had gone through it and lost in that. It was just this culmination that was, if it hadn't been such a long and tedious process to get to that point, you certainly wouldn't appreciate it to the same level. But and then I'm trying to remember what was the first part of the question, the second part of the question.
In terms of how can Tech and UVA become a big rivalry?
Yeah, I actually think that the rivalry, given how lopsided it's been, the fact that it still burns as hot as it does, tells me that I think the rivalry has real staying power. Like I really believe it. Now, in terms of getting to the point where you're a Duke, Carolina, or like Ohio State, Michigan type of thing, I think you need both teams to be ranked higher. I mean, that's what I think needs to happen to get that national recognition. But I think here regionally and locally, I think that this rivalry has every bit as much staying power as any in the country. And candidly, as painful as it's been at times in football, I would not trade it for anything, because I mean, I really feel for these schools that don't have it. Like, what does Maryland have now in the Big Ten? They don't have that bullseye, and particularly in a year like this, where it's been so hard to get through the whole season. It's been a slog. I mean, it hasn't always been fun, and particularly for the players and coaches, but to have this on your schedule, and I'm so glad it got pushed back to the end, to look at as your bullseye. I mean, it's what makes sports great. I mean, it really is that passion and that energy around it. It's why we do this. It's what attracts me to the whole thing. And I'm, as much as I love beating the Hokies, I'm grateful for the Hokies. I really am. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. It wouldn't be as fun without them. And, from that sense, I think we all should be very happy that the other one exists in the same orbit. And I know there are Virginia fans that say, oh, we shouldn't have let them into the ACC. I'm like, come on, bring it. Let's do it. I mean, like, let's be in the same conference. Let's do this every year, and let's have that energy and that fire and everything that goes with it. I just hope it doesn't wane anytime soon, but I don't think it's going to in football. If it could survive 15 straight losses by one team, and still have, like, Tech hates Virginia as much as they did probably at the beginning, and they beat them 15 times in a row. What does that tell you?
I have to ask you, as a visiting broadcaster, and especially the Who's broadcaster, what is it like to call a game at Lane Stadium and Castle Coliseum?
I love it. I really like Castle. I enjoy, I will say this. At Lane, I've seen a couple things that I haven't loved. But that goes with the rivalry. It just does. But they're an impassioned fan base. And look, I'm sure there's plenty of things that people see at Scott Stadium that they don't love. I mean, when things get heated, sometimes it can go a little too far. And I can't say it has for me personally. I don't want to say that, because it wasn't for me personally. It wasn't anything directed at me, but I've seen it with other people. But all that to say, that's what rivalries are about. I mean, that fire and at Castle, I love that it's an old barn, and the atmosphere in both places is outstanding. It just is. I mean, it's what makes broadcasting college fun. I mean, I think each place has its own kind of unique personality, and yeah, I enjoy going to both places. I enjoy it a heck of a lot more when you can come away with a win, and maybe that's why I haven't liked Lane so much, because we haven't ever won there since I've been doing this, for crying out loud. But yeah, it's two venues that I'm very thankful to have in my orbit.
For my final few questions, I wanted to go away from the field for a second. You mentioned you love Charlottesville. How would you describe it to someone who's never been there, or maybe what are some of your favorite parts about the town? Because I have a sister that went to UVA, so I've visited Charlottesville over the past couple of years. It's a great historic town, but how would you describe it as now a kind of a resident Who?
Yeah, it's something that has really, really grown on me in the time I've been here. I liked it right away, but I've learned to like it even more and more the longer I've lived here. I think I have an appreciation for the historical component to it, but I always think I love towns that have something that differentiates them from others, where it's got a personality that's unique to itself. And I think Charlottesville has that in spades. It's a town that's very proud of itself. I mean, sometimes you could make the case too proud of itself. But I mean, I think that's not unusual for kind of neat places. There's an element of that, but I love that it's got, I love that it's got a culinary component where there's a lot of different restaurants you can go to. Hopefully that continues beyond this year, where a lot of those restaurants are under duress, I know, which is really tough. But it's also got it's got a great outdoors component to it. I'm somebody who is a big mountain biker, and I can go off my back of my house, and I can be riding 15 minutes from my house off the trail in Monticello, or I go the other direction. I'll be around a reservoir. There's all sorts of trails around here and cool things like that. But again, culturally, I think it's got a neat aspect to it. I think the downtown mall is a great addition to this town, where there's a lot of things going on. And again, like I say, hopefully when we're out of this whole mess, it's going to continue to be that way. I think there will be a little bit of an adjusting period when this is all through. But yeah, it's just got a nice energy to it. And, I think I like college towns, period. I think college towns are pretty cool. I think the energy that comes from a campus is unique, and you can't get that any other way except through youth. And I think that exudes into the rest of the town, but it's not just about the college, but it certainly does revolve around it.
And I saw that I was reading that you've become involved outside of the broadcast booth. I mean, you're part of UVA's Committee on Sustainability. I was reading something about that. How did all of that come together?
Yeah, that was something that started probably 2 years ago. I was, as I mentioned, I'm a Colorado guy, so I was back home actually, and the forest fires were burning particularly hot that year. And I say particularly that year, it's becoming every year, but in where I was, really throughout the state, like it was to the point that I was with some friends, and we do an annual backpacking trip. We couldn't find anywhere to go because there was just too much forest fire devastation going on. And I don't know. And then and we up in the mountains at one point, we've got a place we've always gone to, and there was ash falling from the skies. It looked apocalyptic, even though the fires were 200 miles away. But it was a sunny day where it was cloudy and ash was falling. And I just remember thinking, this is what hell looks like. And I said, I mean, I got emotional about it because it was something that I, hold close to my heart. And I said, you know what, that day I said, I don't know if I could make an impact, but I'm not going to look back and say I didn't try. I'm not going to look back, whatever happens 20 or 25, 30 years from now, is this thing potentially accelerates, which it still might, but I'm not going to look back and say I didn't do anything about it. And so from that point forward, I tried to find ways, avenues that I could make some kind of an impact. And that is one of the greatest challenges, particularly with a topic that is as, I guess, nebulous, maybe the right word, but it is a unique, I volunteered with Big Brothers and Big Sisters for the first, 10 years over here. I'm still in touch with my little brother, Adrian, who actually came out to Colorado with us at one point. But, that was very tangible. Here's how you volunteer. This is what you do. Trying to help in climate change and fight climate change is a little different. It's more abstract, and it's you have to figure out ways that you can do things. And and I wanted to go beyond just recycling and composting myself, which we started to do religiously. I think we all have to do our part, but I wanted to even make bigger impact, and so I'm trying to think with my platform, how can I do that? And so that's right. I actually reached out to the president of the University of Virginia at the time, Jim Ryan, to see what he could say. And he directed me to the sustainability team to do some work with them. And so I've been doing work with them. I'm also doing some work with the ACC, which has been really fun of late. That's a group that's starting to grow legs in terms of what we're doing to organize the schools, and ultimately to potentially try to get the actual front league office to take on some of these initiatives themselves. So, it's just trying to affect the orbit you live in and the space that you occupy. I think if we all tried to do that at some level, we would beat this thing. But it's going to take a really big effort, and it's going to take everybody kind of trying to do their part. So I'm just basically trying to do mine. And as somebody at the University of Virginia, I feel like maybe I could help potentially affect change here at UVA and maybe within the ACC footprint, and trying to start there and see where it goes.
For sure. And thank you so much for that work. Probably more important than anything you'll ever do in the broadcast, really trying to make our planet a better place. Dave, thank you so much for your time. You've been really gracious with us with it. I guess my final question for you is, where do you see yourself in 10 years? I mean, you've been at UVA now for over a decade. You've called a national championship. Obviously, only a handful of people have done that. I mean, is there anything you want to do, anything you want to try out? Are you content? I mean, where do you see yourself 10 years from now?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer because I guess there's nothing tangible that I would answer. I would tell you what I want to be in 10 years is doing something that I love in a place where I'm valued. I think that those two things and where I can make impact, those are the two things that will guide where I am. And that very well could be here at the University of Virginia. If things stay as they are right now, it will be. But you just, I never say never. It's not as though I have grand aspirations where I want to be on a, Sunday NFL network broadcast by such and such date. That's not how I think. I really do think about it more from a standpoint of how does it impact my lifestyle? I mean, lifestyle plays into it for me. There's no question. And I really have a great lifestyle at the University of Virginia, and it fits as I said, my core beliefs. So if I'm here in 10 years and I'm still appreciated and they want me here, that would be perfect from my perspective. If it's somewhere else down the road where another opportunity presents and I feel like maybe that's good to take the next step, maybe you do, but I put it this way, I'm not planning to. So I just want to be somewhere where I'm happy and I'm doing what I love, and hopefully the people that I'm speaking to are hearing it and you are making some impact.
Well, personally, I hope you're with the Who's for the foreseeable future. But Dave, thank you so much for your time. Like you mentioned, if a Hokie and a Who can have a civil conversation, then anything is possible in this world. And like I said, I'm a really big fan of your work, and best of luck, and especially good luck calling the game tomorrow.
Thanks, Billy. I appreciate it. It's been fun catching up with you. Good luck with everything that you're doing.
For sure. That's Dave Koehn, the voice of the Virginia Cavaliers. He's been so gracious with his time. This has been the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.